Hello, Chanelle. Welcome to this, Important Cool podcast. Just to make it clear, the way we do things at Important Cool is we conduct transparent journalism. So, apart from anyone who watches this interview now or later on our website, it's going to be used as what we call an artifact, as evidence for the piece that I write. So, I'm going to be interviewing you and a few other people, and including the quotes in a written piece. But for people who want more context and more depth, they can sort of go behind that and see the whole original interview. That means, though, that we don't. Our priority with this isn't making it a short, succinct interview like you might normally do with media, where you want to get your talking points across quickly. We really want you to take your time, explore all the tangents and all the details. For our viewers, Chanelle is from the Women in Transition organization, as well as the Poor People's Economic and Human Rights organization and the Kentucky Alliance Against Racist and Political Oppression. So you're in Kentucky, in Louisville. It's a long way from Baltimore, but you obviously think these issues are still relevant?
These issues are most definitely relevant. What we've seen with the Ferguson moment and within Baltimore, Chicago, Oakland, and even in Cleveland, these issues are not sedentary in just one state. Or in one city. This is an issue that's taken place, of course, through time and across many different levels of economic backgrounds within the Black community and people of color community as well as poor people. This is something that we're seeing across the board. But as far as Black Lives Matter, that is a campaign that has come to light because of police repression, government repression, and then the economic forces against us.
Okay, and I mean, what's the Kentucky Alliance Against Racist and Political Oppression? We were talking a little bit just before we went live. You've been active with that since March of last year, did you say, or?
I've been active with them since 2011. I became a board member around May of last year. But the history on us, we just turned 40 years old. We started as one of the original Free Angela Davis and All Political Parties prisoner of political back in the 70s. And we've kept up that fight. We've made sure that when the government sends down that repressive arm, that we're there to call them out on that, and also to be there and to take in people who have felt like they've been victim of some type of racism, political repression, whether it's at their job or it's just in the community.
Okay, and this might seem like a weird question in a sense, but is now in some ways a hopeful time. It's a weird question because obviously we're hearing horrible things about violence being done and people being, not held accountable. But it seems like, this is stuff that has actually been happening for a while. The difference now is cell phone cameras and so forth are making it harder for police to cover up and lie about what happened. So in that sense, is there a sense of opportunity amongst, organizations like yours?
Oh, most definitely. I'm a victim of, well, I say a victim, I'm fighting back, so I'm a survivor of police brutality. I was assaulted by 6 officers, and then I say 8 because 2 watched. In my situation, there were no cameras. Cell phone cameras were new, so a lot of people couldn't get those, and it was hard for us to even find surveillance video with the neighborhood stores where I was at in my assault. And so to refute my word against the officers that committed the violence was hard. They switched the officers and made it one officer. The court was really a little biased in a way, but in my situation, it just, even looking at what was going on and what my word was, they decided to drop my charges and expunged them that day. What happened, though, is what we're really fighting against. It's awesome that we're getting this on footage and we're seeing this firsthand. We're seeing people victimized by the police or killed by the police or the state authority figure. But what we're really trying to fight is what's happening within the system, what's happening once it goes to court, who the juries are, how police obtain impunity. Those things are the biggest fighting factor that we have right now, because regardless if we have tape of them, and we saw Eric Garner in New York, and he was killed literally on camera from the beginning of the altercation to the end, and his police officer got off. However, that police officer has been known to brutalize other people. And so this is something that we've got to get to the end of. You know, what is going on at training? What is happening with diversity training? Who are these officers who come into poor, people of color neighborhoods and are able to police these people without knowing who these people are? We're seeing this across the nation. And so the Black Lives Matter campaign doesn't just stop with action in the street. It doesn't just stop with protests. It doesn't just stop at city council. We're also in the line of policy making and making sure that we, the people, are a part of that policy making if we ever want to see justice served.
That's very inspiring. I'm curious. It sounds like you're really engaging with the system at many different levels. What kind of traction are you getting? Are people listening? Do you feel like that there are people on the inside, so to speak, who are sympathetic voices?
Yes. We're seeing half and half. You have those that work in the system, whether they're part of the police department, whether they're part of the councils, your city councils or aldermen, whether they're a part of the state government in some way, listening to our demands and understanding what type of changes need to be met. With those demands, we know that a certain type of policy has to be placed, whether that policy needs to take place at the city level or at the state level. And you also have some who are just excited that we're doing this work, but of course can't come out at the public level to acknowledge that the work that we're doing is very, very well needed. That they have to do their jobs, so then it's in our duty to do our jobs. Okay, good.
And there's been street actions in actually in Louisville, where you are, recently in the last week or two.
Yes. Recently, we just had like the biggest sporting event take place in Louisville. It's called the Kentucky Derby. It's a very high-powered event. You have a lot of movers and shakers, not only in the horse industry, which is a very very wealthy type of event. I mean, this is a $10 billion day. This is the highest sports day in the world. Come down, and so we made sure that we had action at that level. We did an action on Friday in conjoined with solidarity of other social justice organizations in the city, along with the MSD workers and their union, called the action together because they've been waiting on a contract of a company that equals our water company, but it's mostly black. So we joined them. Some students who are against sweatshops, L-Surge showing up for racial justice, Louisville showing up for racial justice, and that's an organization of white allies understanding their privilege, along with the American Indian social movement. We also had people against Big Coal. We were all out there protesting outside of Churchill Downs. We got a lot of people's attention because Friday is a local day, so we had a lot of local people listening in. Very few agitators, as we had in the past with several of our other actions. You usually have a lot of agitators that want to tell you about where your place is in calling for Black Lives Matter and thinking this is only an anti-police campaign, which is very much a pro-black campaign. And then on Saturday, which is Derby Day, we get out there with a demonstration. We made effigies of black bodies and taped them to our backs. And we did a die-in at the steps of Churchill Downs in front of the National Guard and the local police. And we made sure we held that space for a long time. And just getting everybody to realize that a lot of laws that had passed against us are coming back. And so we're seeing this refutation of history take place. And we're calling that out to attention, demonstrating, singing songs, chanting. And yesterday, a young group of black students at our very prestigious high school, DuPont Manual, have started a black student union underneath the guise of two individuals, Brandon Colbert and Taylor Little. And Taylor Little has started a campaign called Black History Matters. She's fed up with American history not involving black history in the curriculum. Here in the state, I think you either at your junior year or senior year before you even learn anything about black history outside of Black History Month. And it's usually the same people. So we don't learn anything on a local level or state level or even within the Black Power movement, which is totally erased from a lot of the black history curriculum that's even taught. And so she's fighting for that. So yesterday they did a vigil for Baltimore. They did a vigil for police brutality victims and just people in these areas. And we took off and we did a march from our office, which is on a prestigious street here in Louisville, to 28th and Broadway, which is a historic site for the 1968 riots that took place after King's assassination.
Okay, so actually, it's very interesting you mentioned then the riots after the Martin Luther King assassination, because one of the things we're seeing a lot of people now doing, I'm seeing a lot of white people quoting Martin Luther King at black people, telling them that they should be peaceful. But I mean, at the time of Martin Luther King, that he wasn't seen as a peaceful figure. He was seen as inciting riots and being divisive. And when there was when black people staged any kind of sort of unruly or confrontational protest, he would be blamed for that as well at the time. It seems. I mean, I'm no expert on U.S. civil rights history, but I've seen that demonstrated quite clearly. How there's, I wonder if you could comment on the role of nonviolence as someone like MLK talked about it, and also how the perception of his position on that, how that perception has changed over time, and were people throwing at him the same charges they're now throwing at mostly peaceful activists, and then but you know, trying to put his name on it. Is there a co-option happening there?
Oh my gosh, that's almost right on time, because we're having a problem with that when we see these peaceful protests being interrupted with violence from the police or agitators from the outside. And when we take back that natural right to defend yourself, then it's our problem. Going on the MLK part, that's almost the most frustrating thing, is people understanding Black history. They forget that this young man was recruited by Southerners, especially with SNCC and the SCLC, to be this voice, giving people power to fight back, either peacefully, legislatively, and even through demonstrations and protests. And they have to realize that happened when he was like 27 years old. And at the time when they were marching and trying to hold these peaceful protests under the guise of Gandhi at the time, he had to change his outlook on that, because they were met with violence every single time. The same exact violence that we're seeing from the police and state every single time Black protesters are protesting on behalf of Black Lives Matter are met with this violence. I think the way the media portrayed it back in the day is the same way the media is portraying it now. Ferguson has been protesting since August 9th every single day. We don't see that on we don't see that in the media. CNN especially, they show up when
August 9 last year.
Yes, August 9th of last year, 2014, the day that Michael Brown was killed. That night they started with a peaceful vigil, and it was attacked by police. But ever since they started that protest with Hands Up, Don't Shoot, they've been protesting every single day. Different groups within the city will hold a protest somewhere within the city. And we don't.
I want to interrupt you just quickly there, because it really is amazing how effective the blackout on peaceful protest is. Or this isn't an example of peaceful protest, but I'm not sure if you've even heard about this because it got so little coverage. But there was a guy, I think a white working class guy, who set himself on fire recently at the Capitol building, a self-immolation. You know what I mean? Like, this is something that you would expect to make the news, holding a sign saying, tax the 1%. And that didn't, that epic action of self-sacrifice didn't get reported, and where it did, it was described as crazy, which is exactly what they said about people in the Arab world who set themselves on fire before the uprisings there as well. Exactly the same. But that didn't get any coverage. So even a dramatic act like this wasn't able to get any coverage. But if you throw a brick through a shop window, it'll be all over CNN and Fox News. And I want to ask you, what do you think about the argument that that's a good reason to engage in property damage or these kind of, not violence against people, which is, we conflate violence against people and violence and damage to property when we're talking about protesters. But is damage to property a viable way of putting it? We say Black Lives Matter. Well, how do you put a price tag on that except by making the business community actually physically have to pay? I just want to know your reaction to that.
And I think with you saying that and being all the way in Quito and then not even being, you know, American, people have to understand that the way that America portrays itself is a very violent country. So I've always said that the violence is America's culture. So that's what you're going to see mainstream media report on, is the violence, because we love violence. People will ignore everything peaceful or good about society until something violent happens. Our local news is inundated with kidnappings, murders, or anything that's violent, and you get like 2 seconds to maybe 30 seconds to report on something that good students did here or there, or something that happened great on the city. But if it involves our mayor, of course, it's going to be the highlight of the day because we want to portray that this city is doing well, while we ignore, which is instinctively a violence itself, a violent act by the media, ignore anything else that happens with people in these situations, especially marginalized people. And so when we see marginalized people fighting back, then we want to call that violence. That's the violence that we're talking about. But that violence is caused by something. And what is it that perpetuates that violence? And so if we ignore that, then we're ignoring the entire problem, and we're never going to get to the solution. So what I say to that is, these people rather feel sorry for a broken window, but we're not feeling sorry for Freddie Gray's broken neck. You know, that's the dichotomy in that. Here we have like a young boy who's shot down to death by a police officer, a man that is choked to death on camera by officers, and we have an officer who chases a man and pulls out his gun and shoots him 8 times. And now we have Freddie Gray, who was taken on this rough ride, and his neck was crushed. That's violence. And his neck was severed. That is violence. But you're worried about when the police come and attack us, or in the case of Baltimore, that first day of the riots, we learned riots from somewhere. White people started those violence that were Oreo fans and began attacking those protesters as they marched through the city. So I'm not for sure what people would like to see, but I'm thinking if somebody's throwing beer bottles at you, stealing your belongings, punching you in the face, that you're not supposed to fight back. I mean, I 100% stand with Baltimore in the situation that happened, because I know what would happen if I was attacked first. And then the repression that the police has put these people under. We're seeing the reports that police violence is not anything new in Baltimore. Police repression is everything. Government repression is everything, where you have neighborhoods upon neighborhoods that are vacant and abandoned, job placements that are non-existent. The food scarcity is scary. We have a Maryland legislator stating that because of the kids fighting back when they did their peaceful protests and attacked by police, so then fight back, that we should take the food stamps and welfare away from their parents. Who's to say that every last one of those children are on welfare? It's because they're black, you assume that they're on welfare. And in this country, we have already stated proven fact that black people are not the largest population, nor the largest population in demographic on welfare. So this attack and this whole memeing of who black people are is violence in itself.
And it comes in a context where that verbal violence is linked to real systematic guns and baton violence as well, or pepper spray, or the incredible footage we're seeing from these protests, which really does. I worked in the Middle East throughout some of the unrest there, and it really does remind me of the protest scenes I saw there. Hopefully, it can have a more productive outcome than a lot of what's happened there. But I'm curious now, because of, at the moment the focus of these incidents is Baltimore. That's where the nation's eye is at the moment. Hopefully, I'll be speaking to someone from there later on. But for all of us outside of Baltimore or outside the U.S., as I am, most of us never knew anything about Baltimore until The Wire came out. Of course, the smash hit TV show. So David Simon, the creator of that show, has been a really important sort of perspective on these events for, I think white middle class America generally, and also the rest of the world, because he's shown to have an affinity for the city and its people. So we look to him as a translator. Someone called him a translator. He's made 2 comments which I'd like to get your response to. One was in an interview where he said, this is as much about class as it is about race, though of course you can't really tell where one stops and the other one starts. And separate from that, elsewhere on his own blog, he said that if you can't protest and show your rage without a brick in your hand, please go home. Now, he's copped a lot of flack for that, and I kind of agree with his critics, because I think from where he's sitting, it seems like a big deal that all these people are peacefully marching. He doesn't realize that from outside, the only thing we're hearing is about violence and riots. And is it better that we hear that, or is it better that we hear nothing at all?
No, we definitely need to hear every last piece of side that comes out of any of these situations. Where you first talked about, we've got to make sure that we identify the intersections that take place. And I think that is what people are ignoring. People don't think that, people absolutely do think that poor and black go together. But then outside of that, they don't see the other intersections that happen within that. And so that's what Black Lives Matter means. It means that we're all of these things. It means that women get abused and, brutalized by the police. It means that men, it means that queer lives, it means that trans lives, it means that our children's lives, it means that education sucks. It means that the food is, we don't get healthy foods into our neighborhoods by those things. And that definitely goes into class, because we as a group of people, this race, a concept that we didn't create, race plays a part in that. We don't hold stake in any industry in this world at all. I mean, we hold no stake in industry at all. Yet we are subjected to
Michael Jordan owns a basketball team, doesn't he?
We don't own a basketball team. I mean, one or two of us owns a basketball team in conjunction with anybody else. But that you're right. That's where people will go. Well, you play basketball or you play this kind of sport and you buy guns. We don't build guns. We don't make guns. We don't even rape the earth to even get the materials that are needed for the guns. The same thing with the drug war. We don't own a coca plantation. I believe if most drug dealers and drug users understood where crack and cocaine comes from, which I'm sure that they do to most extent, if they understood how it's even formulated, then that would make a big difference in their lives, but it's not. And it's easily obtained and pushed into our neighborhoods, all poor neighborhoods across our nation, and these are the things that we deal with, but that's not industry, and we don't own that. So that's part of the problem that comes up when we talk about the class situation, and that most definitely intersects with race. Back to Simon's second part of his conversation, that first part, I want to make sure that is everything that deals with Baltimore right now, which sits an hour away from our nation's capital and is one of the poorest cities in the nation. As we talk about the violence that takes place, put the brick down, what led up to the brick even getting into the hand? What is behind that mentality? I'm assure you that mentality isn't like, oh, I want to break a window. For what? For what? There is so much built behind breaking that window that I totally agree with, because if I was in that situation, yes, I would probably want to break a window too, or break somebody's face with that brick, especially the person that's keeping me repressed in my neighborhood, that pushes me back into this economic slavery. Here we are again. I believe you talked about, like Gerald Horne, here we are again talking about black people and economic slavery, and we're here again. We've been ostracized from many places of building any type of economic construction in our neighborhoods, in our cities, and we see that on a daily basis. Like I said, here in Louisville, we're fighting with our city on transparency. We can't even get afforded a city meeting to sit down with us when they want to build something new into our neighborhoods, or the gentrification that's taking place. Afforded the same type of opportunities that's afforded to people across town. We're not ignorant. We're not stupid. We have education. Senator Catherine, I forget her last name, of Maryland, stated that we're a non-monolithic people, and people have got to stop thinking of black people as one type of group of people. We are all different types of people, and we saw that after the Black Power movement broke down, of getting into offices and affirmative action. That was just one little step, and here we are at the next step. We're going to be a part of policy regardless if we're politicians or not, and we're going to take back our communities, and we're going to do it ourselves. That's not for somebody else or the city or the government to do. I know the president came up with his My Brother's Keeper, but that's just giving money in the hands of the cities and states and doing what they will with them, instead of solving the systemic issues that are keeping people of color and poor people marginalized.
That's fantastic. We've already got covered a lot of ground here, but I wondered, one of the other things David Simon mentions, one where I think we might agree with him a bit more, is the role of the drug war in this, and how the drug war has criminalized large populations, and it allows what happens whenever you have these laws which are widely applicable, that many people could be arrested for drug use if the police want, is that it gives them the ability to use them in a discriminatory way against African American people, which we know is the case. There's statistical analysis to show that black people don't use drugs at a rate 10 times higher than white people, but they're arrested for drugs at a rate something like that. And it's interesting, you mentioned the coca plantations and that black people are not owning them. I was wondering, there's immense amounts of violence carried out here in South America, where I am, as part of the drug war. With military style techniques used by the DEA and local sort of pro-American forces. And the link between that violence, which is also against non-whites most of the time, against indigenous or campesino populations, and the violence in the U.S. At the same time as sort of the sanctioned drugs of alcohol and tobacco are pushed by white industry. I wonder to what extent you see drug reform as part of solving this problem, if at all.
No. Drug reform, that's just another way to keep a hold on, a systemic hold on the entire drug war. I mean, the person at the heart of the drug war is the U.S. government right now. I mean, we've seen that since the 80s. They're just working hand in hand with each other. And what is drug reform going to do? What is that really going to do? If we're not legalizing drugs that are not harmful to people in the environment, because, for example, marijuana, black people are arrested way more than any other group of people in the United States just for small possessions of marijuana. That's nothing. We even saw a report that our new drug force detail called Operation Trust, to build trust in our communities, but you're illegally capturing people based on just non-relative amounts of drugs. 10 pounds of weed is all that they've found in 2 months with this task force. And I'm like, that's clearly not anything. And I think anybody who's a pothead or who grows weed knows that is nothing. That's nothing. But what we're seeing is, like you said, South America, with this correlation that we're seeing, is that if the government in their military style, whether it's the U.S., Colombia, Bolivia, or Venezuela, if they were not involved, I don't think that it would exist. I really do not think that it would exist at the rate that it's existing right now. I don't think the death rates would be that high. Of course, the arrest rates wouldn't be that high. And I don't think the manufacture rates would probably exist at all. I remember doing an anthology report on Bolivia in a coca plantation near La Paz, I believe, and they were talking about how the manufacture damages the males and the females in the society, but along different ways, and especially along different ways than we know here. The sex trafficking with the females, yes, that's almost mirrored with South America and North America. However, males pertain in the manufacture of coca and then become debilitated by the way that you have to extract the essence to make cocaine. And I'm like, if people in the U.S. knew that, they most likely would not even be selling or doing the drug, because it's just damaging environmentally and as far as humanity is concerned. But we don't tell that part. The government doesn't tell that part, and they don't even acknowledge that that part even exists. And I believe that the militarization of the police and the use of military to apprehend people within the drug war is just that way, to keep people blindsided on different parts of the fence. On South American side, you have the manufacturer position, and that's the economical slave trade in itself, with sex slaves and people slaving on these plantations, children being raped and missing. We only want to highlight Africa when that happens on a certain basis, and that happens all through Africa and throughout South America. Young women and girls coming missing and snatched up along this drug trade and used as mules, as well as Central America. That's behind every last one of their genocides that's taking place. Is this
I'm a little confused about what your solution would be. So your solution would be just better information for the population to sort of make them aware of
No,
this
it eliminates the
problem?
military.
Or are you suggesting legalizing and bringing this business and regulating and treating it as a medical issue and so forth, bringing it into the light so these issues can be addressed? And
Yes,
so it's
I
not
definitely.
useful as it's not used by the police as a club to hit whoever they don't like over the head with.
Exactly. I definitely think the military needs to be removed from the drug trade situation. That is not a a warfare situation. They need to be removed from that because we're seeing them at the local levels. I definitely believe that the certain drugs need to be legalized, and also put other drugs put underneath some type of recommendation, especially when you go into like medical misuse of certain drugs. But at the end of the day, we're just looking at the drug war as an attack on people, poor people of color, black and brown bodies, across this nation, across this entire hemisphere.
I mean, one thing, of course, none of the cases that we've mentioned so far in this interview have anything to do with drugs. So obviously, that's not the whole problem. The police will find a reason to do what they're going to do. One thing you also mentioned is, the black people don't have ownership stakes in these in these major industries and so forth. I mean, I don't want to pretend that there's no difference. The recent statistics I saw say that the average white household in America is 20 times more affluent than the average black household. But at the same time, most white people don't have a major stake in industry either. They're also, on the outside of the real wealth of the country, looking in. There's something that I'm reminded of is that there's an expression about the press, that the press is rich people paying middle class people to tell other middle class people to be afraid of poor people. And to what extent is white America sort of being diverted from their own real enemies here?
Honey, I live in Kentucky. The Senate Majority Leader is Mitch McConnell. So we see that on a serious basis, and that almost goes back into the drug war itself, as his family's ship was caught, shipping drugs into the United States. He goes against every part of his constituents' needs. I mean, we literally have dire poverty in most parts of the states, and even in some parts of the city of Louisville, which is where I'm at. And it's kind of sick because you have people with no income, and majority of those people are white in our state. We only make a part of maybe not even 10% of the population here in Kentucky, and I really went far on that. But you have a whole host of non-income people who are white. These are the people who are poor in our state. And then working class is a mixture, and of course a lot of that is mixed between white and black, but even at the poor level, even at those two classes, you have clashes of people who see certain white people get more assistance from the state than black people, and that actually is a truth. There are certain times where I've watched a friend of mine who's white and her two children receive insurmountable amounts of assistance, whereas somebody who was black didn't receive those amounts, and they were doing the same exact thing.
Where's that discrimination taking place? Is that because there's discretion on the part of people in bureaucracies about who gets what, and into that discretion, into the gap created by that discretion, marches the racist prejudice?
Most definitely. Most definitely. And we're seeing that now with the repercussions of the uprisings. If we uprise, we won't give you your assistance. A majority of us uprising aren't on assistance. Most of us have bachelor's degrees, master's degrees, PhDs. We're out of work. This started the economical class fight between with bureaucracy was Occupy. It's the end. You know what I'm saying? We're not getting ready to take it anymore. We saw the Great Recession in 2008. We lost jobs. College students were waking up. They were going to school and not finding any jobs in the industry or the study that they majored in, and then they're getting out and there are no jobs. And so we're still here, even though job rates go here or there. Black unemployment rate in the city that I'm in is almost 20%. You know what I'm saying? And with our children, it's almost 40%. And it's just like, seriously, that is a systemic problem. That is not this excuse, which is what everybody's giving. Oh, people don't want to go to work. People don't want to apply for jobs. people don't want to. That's more than people not wanting to. People are literally hungry. People are literally, families are literally homeless. This is what we're looking at. This is what we're tired of. And we haven't got there yet in Louisville to be like, hey, stop it. We're trying to wake up as many people as we can, but people are stuck trying to figure out how they're going to put food on the table and send Mimi to school. You know what I'm saying? It's really a struggle. Either you fight or you survive, and a lot of people don't understand that goes hand in hand.
Yeah, this is something that I've often thought about, is how do you practically, I mean, and this is something I'm sure you're grappling with in a more day-to-day basis than I am, but how do activists practically link that need, that the people's personal individual needs, with the collective struggle? And how do you see to people how do you convince people that the only way to solve these problems is collectively? It's individually we're all, sort of adrift and powerless.
That first step is acknowledging that majority of activists, whether past, present, and those that are coming up in the future actually live it. I mean, we live it. I'm on welfare, and I barely can keep my welfare due to certain laws and limitations, and a lot of these limitations and laws aren't even brought to our attention, so we're not kept a gain on them. The other thing is just making sure we're there. We're there at every meeting. We're there at every collective gathering. The third thing is building coalitions. That has been something that's been a core to me since I started with the Kentucky Alliance. And then the first coalition we built was around the Trayvon Martin situation, because we've had a history of that in our city. 3 Black people were killed last year, and then the whole, whether they had a weapon or not, was still brought to the attention. But it was like, what were they killed versus the white people that were killed in our city? We're like, we have active gunfighting in certain situations, as opposed to the Black people who are either mentally ill or being served a warrant or coming to a domestic violence dispute. These are the things that we're going up against. And so we have to bring that to the attention of people. There's also a situation with our law enforcement who are asserting that our young people are doing gang violence. The imposition of gangs is a direct correlation with not having enough resources. So you're going to see more gangs created if there's not enough resources at home or at school or any other line. But like I said, this is an intersectional issue. I mean, I'm going across borders as I'm trying to explain how to get people to understand these things. And a lot of people don't understand these things. A lot of people don't understand that with claiming that there's more gang activity, you're going to be able to allow more police into your neighborhoods. And a lot of people think that that's the answer. And that's not the answer, because then you're putting yourself underneath police oppression. And where does that lead us? It leads us to being, like I said, back into a slave mode. We're going to listen and be under the adjudication of local law enforcement, some that even live right next to you and some that don't, who don't even live in your neighborhood. And then we're at that core of trying to fight for policy. It all interweaves and intersects. And so that's part of our narrative. And making sure that we uphold our narrative. That other thing is kind of like what we're doing right now, grassroots media.
Absolutely. And people should all make sure, take the time to support independent media. The one thing I wanted to, you say you're advocating for policy changes. Is that mostly at the local, state, or federal level, or all of the above? And what kind of traction do you get? What kind of success do you think is possible? How successfully do you think you can change policy without sort of changing the policy-making machinery?
Oh, all that has to happen, and we're prepared for all of that. I think, like, within the last 20 years, that's what activists have been about, and hopefully seeking. And so with Black Lives Matter coming along, we're definitely going to see a more engaged activist sector who understand that policymaking must take place at the local, state, and federal level. So while we hold certain demands here at our local level, we've had that being picked up with senators at our state level who are able to make more of a viable effort to get cities involved. And a lot of times we have a lot of local policymakers and legislators come to us and try to understand what these demands are, especially if they're mirrored at the national level. And so at that national level, for example, We see that a lot of the Ferguson influencers were able to address the 1033 program, where local law enforcement was getting weapons from the military in conjunction with their socks and their gloves and T-shirts, but that made the president wake up to understand there's a part of legislation that is saying this is going on, and he had no idea that that was all being partaked into the 1033 program. He had no idea about that, so they're looking at how to adjust that, and there are senators across the nation who are taking up making sure that police do not obtain any type of military-grade weapons from the 1033 program. Also, with people who are not listed on these lists being killed by the police, first of all, having a national list of police who kill people, and then at that local level as well, where we're even seeing people as unknown race, don't know, what sex they are, and these people were people before you killed them and even after death. So we want to make sure that they have that honor, and we have a local senator here who's brought that to the local level, city level, to make sure that that's taking place at the corner level. So identifying what is custody, whether it's pre or post, and if that death occurs. We're also seeing where we have more engaged, higher-ranked police officers coming to us and, understanding what certain things are. Even our city council, that's what we have here in Louisville, trying to understand what it is that we're seeking as far as these demands and looking into those things. Our local media, we've had several TV stations air investigations based upon our local demands. And so we're seeing that happen, especially with trying to figure out how it can become public knowledge that if a police officer has an ongoing investigation, that is public knowledge. If we pay for this police officer and he's under investigation, but then he's still either on desk duty or out in the field, why is that? And then what happens with that information? Because we're typically not able to see that. And then citizens review boards. That should just have been commonplace. We should not leave any part of government outside of the citizens' hands. And I believe that's why we've grown into this oligarchy, allowing these representatives to represent us and then misconstrue whatever needs and whatever laws need to pertain to us at the citizenry level that we're seeing right now. We're trying to get our democracy back.
So, you're stressing transparency there as part of the solution. What about body cameras?
And that is part of our demands. Where I see the argument with body cameras is I'm not going to give up on that, because that's accountability. If it takes for us to put cameras on you to do your job correctly, then that's what it's going to take. But it also is our job to make sure that the policy behind the body cameras, which is the problem that we're seeing, is eluded correctly. So we've had situations where the camera didn't work and they still were out on the field, and that person ended up being killed by the police. As soon as that body camera is broken, you need to take yourself in and get your new body camera or what have you, because then we've eliminated a problem there. That's one of our problems with the police. They stated that they're going to put the body cameras on in June. This is an excuse they've given us time and time again. But they're going to put them in areas that aren't high crime areas or areas that have high police brutality rates, and we're not standing for that. They're still going to do that.
They're dragging their feet about fully implementing it. They're taking their time and doing it as slowly as possible.
As slowly as possible. And they claim that they have policy written. They don't have any policy written. We've been all through their standards and regulations for them. There's nothing in there that says anything specifically about the technology that's body cameras and the policy around that. And we've had them come to us and let us know that, you got to be careful with certain incidents in certain situations. We understand that. But in the meantime, this is a demand we're asking for, and we want body cameras. We've also learned that their dash cam cameras are optional. Those need to come on, and those need to happen. What people are concerned with is people don't get to see the whole situation, and even in body cam situations or anything that's been taped, police officers still have this impunity. That's the other part of the demands that we're talking about, that transparency and making sure police officers are upheld to the law that they're supposed to protect.
One of the things I know with dash cams in Australia, they've also exonerated police who were falsely accused of brutality. So you would imagine that good police, the police who follow the rules, or to the extent that those rules are fair, would actually want this to go ahead. Similarly, you mentioned the president earlier. I want to know what you think about, how has having a black president changed this situation? It's been, we're well into the second term, but it doesn't seem like this. It seems like almost like this problem is getting worse. Is that just that I'm becoming more aware that the problem is happening, or is there actually an increase in brutality?
It is an increase in brutality. Both of your statements and then the question go together. The police impunity is a part of something that we call the good old boy system. And then it's a part of that protection between police officers, that fraternal ability that they have between each other. Regardless if you're good or not, you're going to stand up next to your brother and you're going to protect them the same way citizens are. So we have that ability to do that. They do as well. Like I stated in my case, the police officers were taken off of the sheet, and then another police officer was added. I don't know who he is, and I had never seen him before in my life, but this is what's happening at that level. And so with the increase of police brutality and then having a black president, having a black attorney general, having more black people in offices, which is something we saw the increase of in the late 70s and 80s, and we thought that we were okay then, we're going to see more violence. We're going to see more racist activity. We're going to see more anti-U.S. government activity on the basis that black people are attaining power. This is something that's almost the same as South Africa. As soon as black people were able to attain power, you saw more xenophobia for one, but you really saw more crackdown on any crime that was committed to natural-born black people and people of color in South Africa. This is the same exact situation that we're seeing in the United States. There are more legislations out against black people, whether it's stereotypical knowledge or anything else. We're seeing more immigrant issues, and mostly against brown people and those that come from places south of our borders, Mexico, South America, Central America, and even the islands. Visa restrictions against people from places of color, Africa, Southeast Asia, these different places where black people exist. We're seeing a whole lot of that more. And that's just, I don't even feel like that's a white power structure. I feel that is white fear. So we're seeing this white fragility around losing their privilege. And that's not something that anyone is trying to invoke. I'm sure there are people of color who are prejudiced, and they almost have a right to be prejudiced at the hand of the racist genocide that's been taking place against black people globally. But white people have got to understand, one, their privilege, and how, yes, it's going to be broken.
Okay. I should put that you've given us a huge amount of great material, but if you don't mind, I've got a couple more questions before we go. One would be about, what do you think of the role of someone like Al Sharpton, or sort of these black leaders with a national profile and who get national media attention? Have they been up to the task?
They've been up to their task. I believe it's a very personal task that they have, given the historic nature of their fight within the civil rights and racial justice history. But if they were really wanted to take a step further and actually be a part of a more meaningful Black Lives Matter movement, then you would involve the young people who have begun this movement and the young people who fight for this movement, who take place in the protests day in and day out. And that's the only problem that we see. We see that there's this shield that they place around themselves, around their own celebrity and celebrity, and using that in a way that only benefits them. Our first march in Ferguson was the week after Michael Brown was killed, and they had Jesse Jackson on the ground. And, of course, there's a lot of anger in the air. People have been attacked, and people were being brutalized day in and day out by a large police force. And here he is asking for money on behalf of his church. And so we challenged that. We asked, where was the money going? And he had to say his church. So at one point, I didn't even care who he was. I just wanted him off his podium and moved out to the side. You had to come away. They were trying to quiet, I believe at this time, I almost think that it was like Michael Brown's uncle or his father, and he was trying to let people know what is happening to them, because a lot of people were outsiders and we were here for solidarity. And we just removed Jesse Jackson from that entire talking point to get him out of the way, because they have to understand this is our fight. This is a fight that we have to partake in. This is a fight that's long overdue, and we're tired of it. There's the intersections between, like I said, jobs, food and housing and black people, and we're fighting that. We're fighting that within our organizations, and we're going to fight that within this movement. So if there's no room for us at your table, then we're going to make our own, and you're not invited.
Thank you. I think that's a pretty solid point to wrap up on. Is there anything that you feel like I've missed in the questions? Any other point that you really want to drive home?
Yes, I want people to understand that the Black Lives Matter movement is a movement of black empowerment. For so many years and so many decades, even after the civil rights law was even passed and act granted to us, even after voter rights and act was granted to us, they are still trying to take those away. Black Lives Matter means that all Black Lives matter, regardless of who we are and across the board. This is not an anti-police operation. This isn't even an anti-white operation. This is a Black Lives Matter operation, and that's where we're coming from at this point. So when we take up fights against the police, at this state intrusion into our neighborhoods and into our lives, against police brutality that we're seeing an increase of, that's what we're going to do. If we need to do that at the state level, if we need to do that at the federal level, that is what we're going to do. We're also taking the resources that we need in our hands, in our communities. So don't think at one point in time that we're not at home taking care of our own front porch, making our own beds. We are feeding our people. We are making sure people have housing. We sit out here every day and talk to people when they need help, when they want somebody to talk to. Real community action. We're building our own community, and we're going to survive in our own community. At the end of the day, I think DeRay, one of the most popular activists, social media activists at this time, and someone on the ground, has stated, and this is what we mean: stop killing us. Stop believing in black-on-black crime is not created at the state level. Stop believing that marginalized systems within the black community are only ours and this one monolithic structure. Stop abusing what is the black person's narrative. Stop killing us and then believe that Black Lives Matter. If Black Lives Matter, we wouldn't even have this situation. And stop saying all lives matter, because apparently they don't. Immigrant lives don't matter. Queer lives don't matter. Trans lives don't matter. Black lives don't matter. Muslim lives don't matter. This is what's going on in the United States right now. Stop saying all lives matter, because if they did, then all of those lives would matter, and we wouldn't have any of the social injustice that we're having today.
So just one question off the back of that. I mean, what do you see the role of organizations like your own? And you were talking before about building alliances. What do you see the role of organizations like your own reaching out to the Muslim community, to the immigrant community, to all these other sort of poor people, to all these other marginalized groups? Do you see not just what should be happening, but what is happening in terms of cooperation on those fronts? Because one of the things, and this relates actually back to the discussion of nonviolence. The idea of a nonviolent protest depends on the media paying attention. It depends that you will embarrass the authorities by showing that you are the more graceful, the bigger person. If you're the bigger person and no one sees it, you don't really there's no progress made through that action. And now it sometimes seems to me like, for example, you have in all these individual causes. The dream is Black Lives Matter. The people trying to sort of stop anti-Muslim discrimination. A lot of the time, it's like they're competing with each other for the same very limited space in the media that exists in the media for activists. And is it possible that we'll see any time in the future some broader movement which can encompass all of these, not necessarily under the banner of All Lives Matter, which I don't particularly like either. I remember, because it implies that there's not a specific victim, that there's not a specific group that is being victimized by police brutality, or specific groups, when there are. Statistically, it's undeniable. So, but what are the possibilities for cooperation from these different marginalized communities going forward?
And that's the problem of mainstream media. There's already cooperation happening between all those different groups of people, and that's why we fight on behalf of intersectionality. The founders of Black Lives Matter represent all of those different groups of people. Opal is a African immigrant activist, and so she incorporates that notion into there. And then of course you're talking about Muslims, so everything intersects with each other, and we're all in the streets together with each other. I think one thing that people note, if they know true history, is understanding what the first Black Power movement did, and that was incorporate a platform and a viable way for other movements throughout this current century to have a way to fight. And so I think that's what a lot of people are seeing. But we know when the larger marginalized person group of people are fighting for social justice, then we all fight for social justice. And so we're all there for each other. We're all there at each other's platforms, at each other's stakes. Like I said, our Black Lives Matter movement in Louisville is Stand Up Louisville, along with some other groups, and we're a coalition of groups and organizations: American Indian Movement, the Kentucky Health Justice Network, West Louisville Urban Coalition. I mean, so many people. The University of Louisville Palestinian students. We're just made up of several groups of people who are all marginalized and all fighting for Black Lives Matter, because we know at the end of the day we're fighting for justice for all. I don't want to confuse that with equality, because at the end of the day I question whose equal rights are we vying for. If I'm asking to have equal rights as for somebody else, what does that equality even mean if we can't even understand that people deserve justice?
Okay. Thank you very much for your time. Chanelle Helm from the Kentucky Alliance Against Racist and Political Oppression. Thank you for joining us on Important Call. We look forward to speaking to you again in future.
Yes, and P. Perkin-Witt.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.